Dash hikashkats.
Listen, you're hearing a language that soon will fall silent forever. Doris McLemore is 83 years old and the last fluent speaker of Wichita, a Native American language. She remembers a time when the language thrived in her community.
You know, you could say things in Wichita that was so funny. The white people did not value it. They wanted it to be gone.
Languages, like all living things, can go extinct. And once they're gone, they take with them not just a form of communication, but a way of thinking.
We may be losing a language as often as one every 2 or 3 weeks.
Why is it worth worrying about these languages anyway?
When a community loses its language, they really lose their history, they lose their connection to the past, they lose all of the wisdom and knowledge that has been accumulated through the centuries.
How would you feel as a native speaker of English if you couldn't communicate the wonder of who you are?
People who have lived abroad for many years in a country whose language is not their own native language. And that issue is something called first language attrition. The more time you spend abroad living in a country where the native language or the language spoken isn't your own native language, you actually begin to lose your own language skills.
You write about the alarming rate at which the world's languages are being lost. Tell me more about that, and more particularly, why is it happening?
You hear so much about the loss of biological diversity, so little about the loss of cultural diversity, and the key indicator is language loss. And linguists believe there are roughly 7,000 languages spoken today, but astonishingly, there's kind of uniform consensus amongst linguists that fully half of them aren't being taught to children, which means effectively they're moribund on the route to extinction.
Well, that's the way it was anyway. A long time ago, they had to name them an Indian name. Now they don't even know what their Indian name is.
They estimate 230 languages that are endangered, that are indigenous languages to this continent, and most people say there will be about 3 in 30 years. So
I'm sorry, wait, 3
languages left.
Yes. Out of 230 that are right now on the brink.
Yep.
Right now, it's a make or break time for the future of the Ojibwe language. We have fewer than 1,000 speakers in the United States, and most of them are elders.
And what that means is that by any definition, we're living through a time when half of humanity's intellectual and social and spiritual legacy is being lost.
There's 581 federally recognized nations in the U.S., and all of them at one time were connected to some linguistic tradition that was their own prior to colonization.
I said, I always tell them I speak in Cherokee.
You know, people come up to me now, too, and they say, can you speak Indian? And there are like over 300 different tribes. You know, can you speak Indian? It's like saying, hey, can you speak Caucasian?
Why should we protect endangered languages, in fact?
There's one lesson of anthropology, it's that culture is not trivial. You know, it's not decorative, it's not just songs and prayers. It ultimately is a body of moral and ethical values that we place around the individual to keep at bay the barbaric heart that history teaches us lies just beneath the surface of all of us and of all cultures.
I'd rather talk Cherokee than English.
There are now 5,000 languages scattered abroad across the face of the earth, in such a bewildering variety that it seems impossible they could ever be traced back to a common starting point, a mother tongue.
Utopians say the world would be a wonderful place if we all spoke the same language.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that, wouldn't the world be a wonderful place if we all spoke one language? And my answer is always to say, what a great idea. Let's make that language a Nuptatuk. Yeah. Let's make it Yoruba. Let's make it Haida. Let's make it Quechua. Let's make it, you know, Tibetan. And suddenly you begin to get a feel for what it would be like to be enveloped in silence.
For decades, the United States government carried out a systematic plan to disconnect Native peoples from their culture.
You know, why does it matter if a culture disappears?
The Bureau of Indian Affairs was part of the War Department, and the U.S. government had a policy of eradicating language as one way to shift so that these people who were demanding space and land were assimilated. And that was the stated goal. There was a boarding school system designed to intentionally eradicate the language.
And of course, language is just an indicator of cultural loss.
For generations, Native children were stolen from their families and forced to attend the boarding schools. Practicing native religions or publishing or teaching native languages was literally a federal offense.
The lesson of anthropology is that we're not talking here about romantic nostalgia. We're not talking even about human rights. We're really talking about geopolitical survival.
The dominant English-speaking society gradually destroyed the old ways. Generations of indigenous children were shipped off to boarding schools, forced to learn English, and punished for speaking their mother tongue.
If you want to know what happens when culture is lost, and yet the individual survives, a sort of shadow of their former self, you know, cast adrift in an uncertain world, a world that often involves disaffection, you only have to look at the sort of chaotic points of collapse around the world and the kind of manias that emerge in the wake of that collapse.
Imagine you were a child, taken from your home, your family, taken from everything you know.
I remember it very clearly. You know, we were just out playing, and back then they had truant officers, you know, these cars and vans that would drive around looking for children that should be in school, and they picked us up one day and took us to school.
By the late 1960s, more than 100,000 Native American youth had been forced to attend Indian boarding schools.
In 1870, the United States government established mandatory boarding schools for Indians across the country. Young Indians were forced to live apart from their parents in the federal schools. Their hair was cut, their clothes were replaced by school uniforms, and the use of their native language was punished severely.
If you spoke your own language, they'd grab you by the ear or the collarbone, drag you in it. You got to write on the board 100 times.
There was a lot of sexual abuse. There were matrons and administrators and teachers that would frequent the boys' dorm at night. They would take them to the bathrooms and molest them there.
It's really culture that allows us as a social species to make sense out of sensation, to find order and meaning in a universe that may have none.
White folks, what we're doing up here tonight, we're not white bashing. This is just a little spiritual spanking you should have got 400 years ago.
I usually have problems doing my act, you know, because I know a lot of you white people never seen an Indian do stand-up comedy before, you know. Like for so long you probably thought that Indians never had a sense of humor, you know. We never thought you were too funny either.